Fantastic.
Oh, it worked. It worked now.
So now we're live show.
We're about to go live, I think.
Oh, okay. So I just came in and you said everything works now.
Well, you bring good luck, but wait, because on Facebook it's not going live. So and
It could
And
take a few seconds, yeah.
did you put it up on Facebook? Because then you have to go back to Facebook to click call live button.
yes, I'm waiting that the go live button is working, and otherwise I will go offline. I will do it again because I want to stream on. But what would you advise, Barry?
Um, yeah, if you don't know what you did wrong the first time, is all toggled? Are they toggled on Facebook accounts?
Yeah, they are.
Mm. You made a live on Facebook, so it's standing waiting with the button grayed out.
Hmm. Yeah, everything is now working except for that Facebook is line. And by the way, I am trying already since 8 o'clock to go live, and I got
Oh,
interrupted with the internet. And Dana also said, like, yeah, being disturbed is not uncommon to you, Dana?
No.
So so what should I do now? Because everyone, I am online.
stay online. I will restream from my side.
Ah, thank you, and thank you so much because you brought good luck that I went online, Barry.
Perfect.
So
I call it good coincidence.
yeah,
Excellent.
oh great, Barry, thank you so much. All right, okay, well, Dana, we're live. Um, wait, how can I do that? It's okay. Oh, wait, I did something wrong. Sorry.
It's okay. No rush.
Uh, wait. Sorry. Wait. Yeah. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Oh, this is a bumpy ride to start this live stream, and I have my honored guest here, Dana Durnford from Canada, and we're trying to go online already for 20 minutes now, and I got uh, internet errors, which never actually happens because I have a fixed, steady, uh, yeah, uh, internet connection. So, but well, dear Dana, welcome here, and maybe
Thank you.
you like to introduce yourself first to the audience.
If you can read English, under my name says Nuclear for Dummies and Dana Durnford. And for the last 10 years, I do 2 hour shows 5 days a week on nuclear, and I break down the current headlines typically a lot of the time for a 24-hour news cycle on nuclear and trying to educate the population. I'm also a researcher, and I research radioactive fallout and its effect upon the environment. And I've been doing this for about 2 decades, publicly about 12 years. And Fukushima was a major event, pulse of radioactive fallout for the planet, and it's still ongoing. And so we're here to talk about a lot of stuff about nuclear and how it causes illnesses and diseases and affects your pets and your loved ones and your communities and your health long term without you being able to perceive it. We're going to try to paint a nice picture so you can identify it and protect yourself appropriately. Hopefully, go ahead, Monique.
Yeah,
Anything?
well, thank you for introducing yourself. Well, in the pre-talk, we already had so many subjects enthusiastically to highlight tonight. Maybe it is nice to first, well, you introduced yourself already a bit, but to, for example, first explain exactly. I think a lot of people are really interested to really know what is nuclear energy. Maybe you can explain that to them.
So, a typical large nuclear power plant is providing electricity for about 1 million homes. It does that by splitting atoms. It uses uranium recovered from heavy, very pollutive mining techniques, and for just a fraction of the minerals that they take out of the ground is used in the reactors. So, in proportions, they claim that a small amount is equal to a lot of gas, oil, and coal, but in reality, the extractions are much more toxic and much more um, intensive. So the industry has painted a false picture. They can't exist without huge subsidies. Now, so when you can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle and you can't see it, how many atoms does it take to boil a glass of water? And so what we're talking about is when these things break down, I want you to picture a snowstorm that starts in a small country with nuclear, and after about 20 days, the whole planet is covered in a snowstorm. Because you can see a snowstorm and you can identify it. If you have it all day, every day, you can't deny it, right? So radiation's the same thing, but you can't see it. And you can't smell it or see it or hear it or feel it or pick it up or touch it or perceive it. But your Geiger counters can. And the species and your children are very susceptible to this kind of radioactive fallout. It gets in contact with your water, your food, and you breathe it in. You're doing your laundry in it, you're getting showers in it, you can't perceive it. Now, as a snowstorm, you would have to wear protective gear to protect yourself from it because you can visually feel it and see it. But with radiation, you can't perceive it. And so it creeps up on you. It takes several decades for a lot of its effects to become noticeable. But think about it this way: over the last 12 years, you probably didn't. 12 years ago, you had to clean the windshield with bugs all the time. You go on a long drive, you might have to do it twice. Now you don't have to clean your windshield all summer long for most people because it starts sterilizing the insects through radioactive fallout. And so 80 years of radioactive fallout, the best way to think about that, it was a constant snowstorm being added to the environment. And nuclear power does provide power for a million homes, but it's always hemorrhaging this type of radiation into the environment. They can't contain it. And that's been the dark secret. So when you hear talk about nuclear waste, think about physical waste, but that it's splitting atoms. The atoms never go away, they never turn to dust, and they pulse energy at the speed of light every second. Released into your environment, you have a new snowstorm. But that snowstorm never goes away. So imagine the next day, the next 16, 20 days, you have another snowstorm. And that snowstorm never goes away. And this goes on for 80 years. That's nuclear fallout. It gets uptaken into trees and plants and insects and humans and birds and animals and mammals and everything else. And you can't perceive it. But it's in your body. Your body attacks all the radiation with white blood cells. And your body can produce white blood cells by displacing red blood cells. Red blood cells carry oxygen nutrition throughout your body. And so if you keep getting radiation in your body, you get less and less oxygen, less and less nutrition in your body because this is permanent. Your body attacks it 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and tries to build a tumor around the radiation, which is in the form of an atom, which there's what's known as a man-made isotope inside of it. Now, these isotopes that we're talking about are not created by the sun. They're not from the solar system. These are anthropogenic, man-made. And so your body doesn't have an immune trigger to defend against it. And it attacks it with white blood cells. So if you cut your finger, your body attacks it for about 7 days with white blood cells and heals it. And then your white blood cell counts go back to normal and your red blood cell counts climb back up again. But with radiation in your body, that never happens. So your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. So eventually now you're going to compromise your immune system because you have a lot less oxygen in your body. Your body is working all the time to attack all this radiation that's in your body. So if you live in a range of a nuclear power plant, you will start to see, now there's around 1,800 diseases from radiation. And so think about how Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes and Down syndrome and schizophrenia, and how heart problems and liver problems and lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, and thyroid and adrenaline. And the thyroid gland, when it's saturated, produces radioactive hormones. It's going to create a whole host of other, particularly for neonates and infants and for congenital malformations with children,
And
start
then,
showing up
sorry to interrupt
generation.
you,
Go ahead.
Dana,
Yep.
because you mean then if it's in the body, yeah, if that,
So it gets in the body. Go ahead.
but that's what you
Uh,
mean that
yeah,
it's
so that's right.
yeah.
I'll clarify that now. So with children, it gets in their, it burns a hole through their lungs when you breathe it in, for instance, and it'll sequester in their bones. It'll start mutating their stem cells, and because they're growing, their cells are replicating. This is very, very damaging in the short term to the child. The body has to attack all the damaged stem cells, and children, of course, and little animals and insects and birds and everything else has these same adverse effects. So if it's happening to the adults or the human population, it has to be happening to your animal population. And your pets, of course, coming indoors, licking their feet all the time, picking up the radiation. So we're seeing this. It'll start to show up as around 1800 diseases. So it's not just cancer. And so for 80 years, they've been trying to convince the population that the only adverse side effects of radioactive fallout was cancer. Now, cancer is there. There's all kinds of cancers. You'll start noticing every street is full of cancers with huge. Now, if you go back 60 years, very, very rare would you hear of a person with cancer. In fact, we're
Exactly.
on, yeah, we're on to, say, about 50 years ago, there was this kid had cancer and nobody heard of a kid with cancer before. And so doctors came from all over the world to study this kid with cancer. Now it's every street got kids with cancers. And so what happened was most of the nuclear power plants worldwide have one thing in common: they're built in prime farmland. They're surrounded by usually, typically, as far as you can see, farmland, and the river where they're getting their cooling water, so called, to, is feeding a host thousands of farmlands downstream. So the farmlands around it are always being harvested and they're moving the food out to the supermarkets. This is distributing another way they're doing of distributing radioactive fallout, because it can't be a coincidence that almost all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms and that are prolific farms. So we're seeing this also with the nuclear waste sites. This is one of their favorite tricks. And the radiation is coming from the fuel pools because the reactor core is contained. But when you take it out of the container, the fuel pools are still hot, what they call hot. Now, the reason they're hot is because that's how they boil water, is by splitting atoms. And the reason they're dangerous for millions of years is because they're splitting atoms. So when most people hear about nuclear waste, they perceive that it's about pulse, gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardments, beta rays, and stuff like this. Physical energy, mystically, type of energy. This energy, that's pulsing energy. But it is that. But it's also, there's physical atoms, and so the gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas are your major ones, or all of them. And what they do, physical atoms wise, when they're pulsing energy, they can pulse energy maybe 20, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 feet, some of them. And because they'll measure radiation by flying over land and measure 1,000 feet off land. Uh, but say radiation is pulsing through your house and there's atoms that are pulsing. When they hit each other, they change direction because they can't mingle because it's energy. So when they change direction, that's called that creates a braking effect. This is a well-known effect in the nuclear industry,
How
and
is
this
it
is known.
called, Dana? How did you call that effect?
I didn't. It's called X-rays.
Oh,
That one in
X-rays.
particular. Yeah, I
Oh,
was just getting that. Thank you, though. I'm glad you
yeah.
brought it up.
I'm sorry to
No, it's great.
interrupt you.
No, no, it's necessary. And so the X-ray is causing this braking effect with so much radioactive fallout, is causing another hideous effect upon humans and species, is whole body X-rays. And so what that does is start sterilizing all the insects. But when you get a big pulse like Chernobyl, if people are maybe hopefully familiar with Chernobyl nuclear
Mm.
meltdown, is being portrayed as the worst nuclear meltdown worldwide. But
Yeah.
in reality, it was a graphite reactor. It was a brand new reactor. It was about 2 years old, and it was using graphite with uranium as a moderator, or graphite as moderator and uranium as a fuel. Now, the reactors in Japan, for instance, are different. They're pure uranium, pure plutonium. They're about each one of them were about 100 times more fuel than was at Chernobyl. And Chernobyl was really, really, really bad. This was a terrible disaster
Mm.
worldwide, believe it or not, for
And
people.
it was in 1986, I believe, eh?
Right. The
Chernobyl.
anniversary was 2 days ago,
Mm.
and I've done
Yeah,
a
exactly.
almost 2 hour show on it,
Mm.
and just Chernobyl. And so Chernobyl, there's orphanages and orphanages and orphanages of abandoned children that are disfigured and has nobody to love them, and that were thrown away like paper towels, literally, because of the deformities from the radioactive fallout, because they'd never stopped eating the food from the local area. And you have to, after these meltdowns, by rights, Japan, for instance, should have evacuated Japan. And the west coast of North America should have evacuated. But if you
Mm.
do something like that, of course, what's the repercussions for
Yeah.
evacuating a
But
few hundred million people?
that is that is very interesting because that was one of my questions, like that I really wanted to ask you, like because you do, yeah, maybe you could, maybe you did that in the introduction, but you do research already for a decade. You do the live streams, but that was one of my questions, like how is it possible that, for example, in Japan, that you say that the whole Japan should have been evacuated? Is that what I hear you say?
Right. Yeah. And the reason why, and we're seeing the statistics now, in the first year there was 865,000 extra cancers. Not everybody has health
Mm.
care, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
this was uniform, symmetrical across the country.
Yeah.
In 2019, a study came out, 14.2% of neonates and infants needed open heart surgery per 100,000 live births. And these are catastrophic numbers. There was 13,650 children had thyroid tumors over 2 centimeters. The
Yeah.
thyroid gland is 3 centimeters by 5 centimeters. So this is a huge tumor in context of the gland. But in order for the thyroid glands of that many children, now pre-nuclear meltdown in Fukushima was 1 in a million. So this is 356,000 out of a million when you scale it up.
Mm. Wow.
And and in order to have this many thyroid tumors, which was covered up by a number of colleges from the United Kingdom that done the peer reviewed studies on
Mm-hmm.
it. In order to have this kind of ratio, um, their thyroids to be that radioactive that they actually got tumors means they're making radioactive hormones, which is going to spread into the pituitary gland in their brain, which gathers up a lot of hormones on top of that and distributes out to really important functions. And then your body's thyroid is feeding all of your body with hormones. So the child is going to grow up completely, at the mercy of diseases that, there's so many of them, you can barely wrap your mind around them and the severity of them. This is why we're seeing bizarre amounts of cancers in children is just skyrocket. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
cancer is the one that everybody recognizes, but again, there's 1,800 diseases. So, for instance, another one was obesity rates doubled,
Mm-hmm.
almost doubled in Japan in the first year. This
So
is a
that's
marker
also so
of
obesity is also part
is a
of.
is a marker of radiation brain damage
Oh,
actually.
okay.
And it's kind of like the sex ratio studies they done after Chernobyl for Europe showed a discrepancy of males and females being born, and so what they expect. One of the studies that they do for radiation for large populations is there more males than females or vice versa,
Mm-hmm.
but typically more males than females, and so what means you got less species that way too, less production. And on top of that, that has to be true for all the species. It can't be just the humans. See?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
in order for everybody to do a study like that, they have to acknowledge that everybody got radioactive poison. And so another example of that was they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, 3,000 kilometers away after Chernobyl 37 years ago, and 400 are still closed today. And then Sweden closed the freshwater fishery, commercial fishery, for 30 years after Chernobyl. There was abortions across Europe, and so there was a lot of these undeniable documented stuff going on that quantified that Europe was really contaminated. But the sex ratio study knocks the ball out of the park because in order to have a discrepancy male and female and the whole population was radioactive, which meant that they were now susceptible to many pathogens and viruses that were normally considered harmless and innocuous and benign were now very threatening to their health, especially senior citizens and children. And so there was all these. There was 6 out of 10 children out of the Fukushima prefecture in Japan had diabetes, and they were expecting diabetes in the children. And diabetes is another one you see increasing among your friends and your loved ones and your families after these major accidents. Now, Japan has continued to ship food worldwide from these prolific. Uh, Fukushima Prefecture was the breadbasket for the Asian countries. Now, 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima Prefecture. Fukushima Prefecture, like Canada, is considered a province, and the United States is considered a state. It's about 6,000 square miles. It's a large chunk of the country that is singled out by its own name, Fukushima. And so most countries are divided up into these little sections. I'm not sure, like in Netherlands, Monique, you're divided up into different sections, right?
Yeah,
Pre-
it's the total is Netherlands, and then you have certain regions which we call provinces, but it's
okay, that's right. We call
that's
them
maybe
provinces
what you
in
meant.
Canada. Okay, so
Yeah.
I just want to make sure people understood what I was talking about. Well, they closed 14 of these provinces, aka prefectures in Japan's terminology,
Yeah.
in Japan for 10 years. So 55 countries banned the food editor. And now European countries, including Denmark and Norway and Iceland, actually, and many other of these, on the fence type countries, are removed restrictions. And the radiation is not going to go away for thousands of years minimum, and um, they're not acknowledging the full scope of the radioactive fallout. They're only acknowledging cesium-137, but they're not actually acknowledging it. And so there were studies that came out of Canada, for instance, United States. A study out of Ottawa, Canada, was showing us 220 million atoms per liter of rainfall of iodine 131. There was 129 with a 15 million year, what they call half-life. There's 10 half-lives to these isotopes. And so this is enough to saturate the thyroid glands of all the species when you talk about so much for so long. There was another study of 20 million atoms of 131 iodine radioactive fallout in British Columbia and the west coast of North America. There's another study of sulfur peroxide, hydrogen buckyballs, airborne. There was another study of cesium 137 at a million becquerels
Yeah,
per
and
square meter.
maybe again, you. By the way, everyone, I am allowed to interrupt Dana. Yeah,
Over and over and over. Yeah, it's
because
fine.
I am a bit like interrupting you with a smile and with I hope a bit
It's good.
too,
Great. No,
because a
go
lot
ahead.
of people, I believe a lot of people also in the Netherlands, but maybe also in Europe. That's why it's also great to do it in English. That maybe people are not aware what iodine is, because and cesium, or is that a
Great.
strange question that you
That's,
can
that's a
explain?
great. No, no, that's a great question. Yeah. Okay, so everything is created from uranium 235 when it's put through a chain reaction. It produces several thousand what's known as man-made isotopes. And so prolific ones are cesium, and dangerous ones on top of that are the ones that I was naming, was cesium 137. And then for iodines, they go in what's known as going into your thyroid. They're known to go in your thyroid gland. as potassium like normally would, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so other isotopes will go in your thyroid gland, by the way, besides iodines. But so iodine is a very prolific. For every iodine 131, there's 10 times more iodine 132, 30 times more iodine 133, 31 times more iodine 129. So when you see a study of 20 million atoms of 131, and bear with me, you'll get it, and 220 million atoms per liter of 129, that quantifies that ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are really nasty isotopes. And normally a serious event would be around 55, like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 55, not 220 million. 220 million is just we couldn't conceive these kind of numbers pre Fukushima, and with a 15 million year half life, they never go away. And what I mean by that is when you have you can't destroy it with a forest fire, for instance. So if when you have forest fires, you liberate it back into the environment. But a big problem with this much isotopes and sulfur peroxide, hydrogen buckyball isotopes, these ratios that were showing up, that was created by spraying salt water under reactors. The sulfur peroxide, hydrogen buckyballs is when you're spraying salt water, the salt liberated and created spherical balls. The balls ingested uranium, plutonium, all these heavy dangerous metal radioactive ionized isotopes. So ionized, we call them man-made because they're not created by the sun, and that your body doesn't know how to defend against it. So everything with replicating cells is really vulnerable. It doesn't matter what species you are, you don't have autoimmune trigger to deal with it, to attack it, and to deal with it. So all species are incredibly vulnerable immediately. And what I mean by that, start becoming sterilized. So you start losing all these species from this radiation, which is another bunch of studies showing how it sterilizes men and women long term, right? It destroys their ability to produce eggs. And this is true for all species. And they noticed this back in the 50s and 60s and another thing about the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyball that I was just talking about, this is a very energetic. It ingests uranium plutonium. It's considered a super hot particle. You only need one of them in your body to cause you serious illnesses down the road. But we're talking about a prolific amount that's inescapable. But you got to consider certain things. The nuclear weapons testing. If we didn't release any more into the environment after nuclear weapon testing was actually a nuclear war. It's the same weapons, the same radioactive fallout, and it was with bad intentions. And I'll explain that to you. The Soviet Union's biggest nuclear detonation was equal to 3,800 Hiroshima bombs or Nagasaki bombs, because the Hiroshima bomb in Japan was a uranium bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. So they're totally different. Plutonium was named after the devil because it has incredible bad attributes to it when it gets into humans or species. And it just makes it so much more worse. They're still both really terrible, but it makes it even worse. So think about Russia and America firing 1,900 Hiroshima, Nagasaki sized bombs at each other. That's a nuclear war. And so the fact that they detonated off one that was equal to 3,800 meant that was a nuclear war. That's a nuclear war. And so when they talk about nuclear winter, that's the cover story. There is no nuclear winter. It's nuclear summer all the time. And what I mean by that is it kills the bacteria. The radioactive fall is symmetrical around the world. So what it ends up doing is it gets in your forest. It kills the bacteria and the fungus in your forest. And of course, your trees, your roots, and everything gotta have bacteria and gotta have fungus.
Mm-hmm.
The whole biosystem gotta have bacteria, gotta have fungus. And so what happens now is your forest doesn't break down anymore because the foliage and the litter in your forest doesn't have the bacteria and the fungus to create a habitat where all the other biota, insects, and everything else can break down the typical foliage and litter in the forest. And so now, after a few years, your ground is not sucking up moisture no more because you don't have the bacteria and the fungus in it, and the rain is washing off it and going down to your coastlines and your lakes and streams and rivers and estuaries and everything else. So this also goes on for a few years. You start getting lightning strikes. Now you have brutal forest fires, and because you didn't break down the foliage and the litter in the forest, it's wafering up these huge flames that creates other forest fires far away that normally wouldn't exist when the forest was breaking down.
And this is why, because that was actually also one of my questions, and I did hear you talk about it in one of your late live streams. That occurs to me that across the world that there are far more fires going on. But since I heard you talk about it, and now I think like that could be very well possible as well. In your opinion, it's because of that the
Right.
lower.
I just cut you off one second. We knew this
Yeah.
because of Chernobyl.
Hmm.
So this is how it works with heavy. So when Fukushima melted down,
Hmm.
they had 8 reactor fuel pools at the top of the building. Chernobyl never had that.
Hmm.
And the reactors were pure uranium, pure plutonium in Japan. So these were huge amounts in inventories. So at the top of the building was fuel pools with decades of reactor cores, which is literally the stupidest place you could ever build something. But that's where they put the decades of reactor cores. Now they do that because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet, let alone Japan. And so keeping it in the fuel pool where it's splitting atoms, the water is boiling off in every fuel pool. So each fuel pool needs about 120,000 liters added to it each day. And that 120,000 liters goes up these tall, skinny stacks they got on site. These are much taller than the big cooling stacks. They're releasing the isotopes, and that's why they got the tall ones so it doesn't land back on the site. So each liter out of the fuel pool is releasing trillions of isotopes, and it boils off that each day. There's around 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. These isotopes never go away. So this is
Thousand,
bioaccumulation.
thousand, thousand. You said worldwide.
There's around 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. So
Wow.
each reactor has 2 fuel pools.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's currently 440 reactors worldwide, but there's
Mm-hmm.
much more that's not working but still have fuel pools.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the common spin fuel pools at each site. Will have, like what's known as a common spin fuel pool, and this is where you take the extra fuel from different reactors they can't fit above it and move it to the common spin fuel pool. So when you then there's universities, and then there's the government laboratories and different agencies, the militaries. So there's well over 1,000, probably around 1,400 fuel pools
Mm.
minimum worldwide.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, and these fuel pools will have decades of reactor cores into it. So imagine 100 Chernobyls in a fuel pool, because that's what we're talking about. Because
Mm-hmm.
Chernobyl was mostly graphite, and uh, not many reactors do that anymore. Most reactors are pure uranium, pure plutonium. So
Mm-hmm.
the concentrations are 100 to 1 almost. So we lost 8 of those in Japan. But if we downplay it and say there was 30 reactor cores that were lost, that was equal to Chernobyl, even though it's completely different. Each reactor is 100 Chernobyls, not counting the fuel pool. But even if we just call it 30, and then we look at the statistics of what happened to Chernobyl and compare it to multiply it by 30 times, this would be a catastrophic event for all species worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So what I done to find out whether this was real was I launched research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 6 years. And so each year I went out on the ocean for 4 to 5 months. And what I done was counted the species in the most vulnerable spot of the coastline was the tidal zones. The tidal zones are exposed twice a day. And then the tidal zones on that part of the coastline, the west coast of North America, had around 7,500 highly visible species. So there was around 700 algae, which is kelps,
Mm-hmm.
in the tide zones, the whole coastline. And amongst that was an extra 5,500 invertebrates without the backbones. They're like little shrimp. But there's around 7,500 highly visible species. So then there was 84 species of sponges, there, and they all come in multiple vibrant colors. There was 78 species of starfish. They came in multiple vibrant colors for each species. There was incredible diversity of shellfish and snails and mollusks. There was clams. There was gooey ducks, which is a big uh, special clam. There was um, abalones. There was many different species of clams, little necks and manillas. There's around 480 species of worms in tidal zones. There was around 30,000 insects at the high tide zone lines. There was what's known as sea anemones. There was around 74 species of them in tidal zones. So it was a very absurdly amount of. You couldn't go from low tide to high tide without stepping on creatures the whole way. So it was a just unbelievable smorgasbord and diversity, around 7,500 highly visible species. So when I went up the coastline, there's at that area there's 27,000 islands, and what I discovered were the species were missing, and so I started trying to write things off as pollution from the local communities, maybe, or the cities down the coastline, and kept going towards Alaska. When I finally done the whole coastline, it was symmetrical, the whole coastline. So that was pretty disbelief. So now I had to repeat it again to make sure that I covered all my. Now I was a commercial diver with around 14,000 hours underwater, and so what I done was revisited a lot of the places I had dove before because I knew for shelter. But I went to all the pinch points of the coastline where the islands. You got 27,000 islands, so there's pinch points where the ocean comes in, goes through an area, and spreads out to the rest of the islands. And I started targeting pinch points, so that's where you should get incredible biodiversity. But it's also the roughest part of the coastline. It's got the highest, fastest currents, and
Yes, and if I again can interrupt you, Dana, like
yeah,
because I also see the chat come by and people asked also some questions, and I forgot to mention because of all the interruptions with the internet in the beginning. Like if people have questions in the last half an hour, people are then I
absolutely,
will add these questions, and that
absolutely,
it's
yeah.
clear for everyone who watches that I am concentrating on what Dana is talking about, because I really want to let it in the information. And I saw come by someone if there is a website where they can find you, and can you maybe say a bit about your where they can find this information, because I can also put it in the chat for the people. I will also copy paste it in the chat.
So the nuclear proctologist.org is my where I hang my shingle to. The nuclear proctologist, one word with THE in front of it.
Exactly.
.org is how you get to my site. And when you get to my site, as soon as you scroll down a little tiny bit, you're going to see the before and after pictures of the west coast of British Columbia. These pictures are double pictures. These are before and after in the same places, before Fukushima and after Fukushima. And then there's the news section for the nuclearproctologist.org, and you'll see links to that there. That'll take you to articles that I've written to break down a lot of nuclear hidden secrets for you so that you can digest it and comprehend it on your own. The idea is to give you enough information that you can extrapolate information on your own, because you might never hear this information again. This
And
is
it's
not
incredible. It's so much information. Yeah, now I interrupt you again, but
it's great. Yeah, no,
people are prepared, because that's I'm really
no, it's
impressed
good.
by how much research you did with the oh no, not east southwest, but the west
Species.
coast. So
Great.
incredible what you did. That's what I like to express, and I
Yes,
put on
there's
some
6 years
light
of that.
because it's getting dark here. Oh boy, I
And
apologize.
well, you can adjust the brightness in your settings in the bottom corner, the 3 dots.
Oh
And
yeah,
okay, well that works too.
yeah, that works too.
Yeah, I got one light on each side of me and one up above me is 600 LED lights.
Yeah, I
So
have my own. I did a tutorial on lighting, but we were belated, so everything. So
yeah,
that's
no, it's
why
good.
it's a bit amateuristic, but I apologize. So it's better now, I guess. All right.
Oh, and so I've done around 2,200 presentations, around 600 interviews, so around 3,000 presentations on this subject. Um, and now I'm doing research on the east coast of Canada in the Atlantic Ocean. And one of the things I've discovered down here in the last 3 years is there's no spiders in the forest, but the spiders are on people's houses in the open. There's no insect eating birds scooping them up.
Well,
And so when I'm out there doing research in the woods, I'm looking for all the species. I'm looking for birds. I'm looking for ants. I'm looking for bees in particular, these types of species. These are prolific types of species. And what I discovered was I wasn't finding them. And so it was kind of hard to wrap my mind around that here in the Atlantic Ocean that we were going to get these types of adverse effects so soon. I was expecting a couple of decades before it became. I wasn't really expecting much, I guess, but it was really hard to believe that. Now I'm in the middle of the biggest migratory route on the planet. We get around 46 million migratory birds a year through here, roughly. Last year in April, the beginning of April, there was a mass die-off of common turs, and the dove kites. So the common murres, the turs, and the murres are seabirds that eat anchovies and squid and sardines. They eat capelin. They eat little small 8, 9 inch fish, basically.
mhm.
And but the dove kites eat microscopic animals, kind of like microscopic animals like the
Mm.
zooplankton, the phytoplankton, stuff
Plankton,
like this.
yeah.
And so to see both of these species show up mass die off for about 600 miles of the coastline was extraordinary because they're two different spectrums of the food chain. One is eating big, decent squid and anchovies and mackerel and stuff like not mackerel, but squid, anchovies, capelin, small fish, herring. But the other ones was eating microscopic, and they both showed up on the coastline, and they both had the one thing in common: they were both emaciated, and they were showing up uh, in around 600 kilometers of coastline. And I went on emergency research. It was got caught in a snowstorm. I was camping out doing this. I was on ground zero. We got caught in a snowstorm the first night. We got caught in a freezing rainstorm the next night, and caught in a heavy wind the night after. But I went
Mm.
into all of the communities. I went down on the beaches myself in these adverse conditions because it was shocking to see this die off. And I talked to everybody, every shop and every gas station, these little communities I was going through to get a consensus. And what they were telling me was forestry and fisheries and the government agencies were showing up each day and collecting the dead animals. We're not saying nothing to nobody and driving away again. So each day there was this new wave of dead animals in these communities along 600 kilometers of coastline. And we only got access to a fraction of the coastline. So the birds weren't just dying in the community. So the official word was that the birds, which weren't supposed to be there, by the way, they were supposed to be on their way to here. They just
You need some tea, Dana.
just bear one more second here.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Take your time.
No, that was really important. The the birds were emaciated, which takes a long time for them to get that emaciated. Many days. And now we're also seeing all the whales are emaciated, seals, the
Mm.
sea lions, et cetera, showing up emaciated. And recently, I've been out to 3 different die-offs of dolphins.
Mm.
I'm going to choke out on you.
Yeah, I've
I'll be
seen
okay.
shorts on your YouTube, and yeah, it breaks my heart to see that. But was it related to, by the way, that they were caught in these weird ice?
That's the only time we've ever had a die-off on this coastline in
Yeah.
history.
Mm.
And they're not supposed to be here.
Mm.
So they were out of their territory.
Okay. Yeah.
So they were looking for food, obviously. That's the only reason they're going to leave their typical, because it's built into them to migrate, their traditional migratory patterns. Like a bird, it's built into them, and they'll just keep going. If they don't find the food that they normally find, then they'll drop dead somewhere. In this case, it was
Mm.
the whole coastline. And
Wow.
so, and so the official story was there was a 200 miles of pack ice, and the birds couldn't find food, and
Mm.
that's why they died. Well, first off, the birds were supposed to be going to the Arctic. They weren't supposed to be coming into the coastline. They were 500-600 miles off their course, and so they showed up here. They were emaciated. That was the end of when they finally showed up here, and there was only about a kilometer of pack ice when the prevailing winds were blowing on the coastline. And I know that because I went down and researched it myself in all those adverse conditions. Because I didn't believe the official story. Now, everybody they were doing interviews with, I called up those people in those communities, found them, and interviewed them myself. And they
Mm.
told me a starkly different story than the mainstream media had told.
Mm.
And they had named them, said they said this, but they said they were really upset that the media had misquoted them. Of course, me and you know what's going on. It wasn't misquoted. That was the cover story. So the cover story was there was 200 miles of ice, but the official story is what were they doing on the coastline when they were supposed to be headed to the Arctic? Why were they all the way on the east coast of Canada's coastline?
Mm.
And so I also do this series of videos, once a month or something like that, twice a month sometimes, where I'll record die-offs around the planet and see if there's a correlation that we can question maybe the radioactive fall or pulse, what's known as the pulse. Because when the reactors melted down in Japan, we had this pulse on our planet of radioactive fallout that was sustained for a very long time. It's actually still ongoing. The reactors are still melting down. The radioactive fallout into the ocean was contaminated officially by the first couple of weeks. The whole ocean was buried in radiation. And they noticed there was a big, originally there was a lot of reports, and I cover a lot of that a lot of the times.
Mm.
And I have thousands of reports of the first couple of years where the media actually covered the die-offs and asked the question, is this related to Japan's nuclear meltdowns? And then in 2015, there was the Paris Accord in France. And this is where they decided to call nuclear the savior instead of nuclear the anti the anti savior, the anti hero, so to speak.
Mm.
And they came out with this design that they're going to blame everything on carbon, and nuclear was the only solution. And this was going to bring nuclear back into the green light because everybody turned on nuclear. The stocks would dive down and flatline. People lost trillions of dollars worldwide. These
Mm.
were very influential, very powerful companies and corporations, and they wanted their money back. So they got now all of a sudden they got all these stocks for dirt cheap because everybody sold them, lost their shirts, and got rid of them, save something out of it. And they got now they needed those stocks to go up in value so they can redeem them now and make an absolute fortune. And this is what they've been doing for about 2 years. They artificially inflated the stocks about 2 years ago. And if you look at the pattern of stocks, you'll see this artificial inflation, and then it dives down after a week, and then it dives down again. And they keep artificially inflating it. It's very frustrating because they're milking the unsuspecting investors. The stocks
Mm.
will go up artificially. They'll buy up the physical uranium from the mining companies and not sell it again. They'll just hang on to it. And that will create this artificial demand for uranium. And so
Mm.
the stocks are looking good. People buy into it, but it can only sustain it for about a week, and then it does that again. So now the
Oh.
people that are losing their shirts, they sell their stocks dirt cheap.
Mm.
The people that made the profit will go back and buy these stocks for dirt cheap, and a couple of weeks later they'll do it again. They've been doing this for about 2 weeks, not as often as they were the first year, but we covered it all as it was happening. It was outrageous, and this is by design, of course. So now we're seeing uh, the forests on the west coast of Canada, and the forests on the east coast of Canada, the coastlines, very devastated by what can only be contributed. Everything links back, including the global warming, by the way, which, and I'll tell you that connection.
Mm.
Everything links back to 2011. But if you go back to 80 years and start looking at the big picture for the last 80 years, you start understanding what happened. So what happens is you got these plumes coming into the environment all the time. The plumes, the atoms are pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, long distances. This is energy, is pure energy. It's as pure as it gets, and it never goes away. It never dissolves. It never breaks down. You can't destroy it, and you can't get rid of it. And some of it has very long half lives, like plutonium 241, say, got a 24,000 year half life, where it's going to pulse this energy. It has 10 half lives, that's 240,000 years. So you got all these different isotopes, you got different energies, they're all pulsing it, you have prolific amounts of it. It never stops being produced into the environment from all the fuel pools worldwide. And you created this invisible snowstorm, this pulsing energy every second. And that's global warming. It's been going on for 80 years. It's very, very real.
And still
And
actual happening in the same sequence and speed? That.
now it picked up the speed in 2011 when Fukushima happened. That was the
Mm-hmm.
pulse. That was
Mm-hmm.
a major pulse.
Mm-hmm.
And since 2011, we're seeing hurricanes and typhoons and cyclones
Mm-hmm.
that are coming on land at 200, 250 miles per hour.
Yeah.
If you go back to the 30s, the highest speed winds ever recorded was just a rare instance of 230 miles per hour. That was considered insane. But now it's normal, right? And
Mm.
but it's only normal since 2011. The so-called climate exasperation, you can trace it all the way back to 2011. The massive forest fires we're seeing worldwide, you can trace it directly back since post 2011. And once you start looking at it, then you can clearly see what happened. And so, what was the catalyst at 2011 that caused the next 12 years to have these particular attributes? There was only one thing. And then the models that I use to explain it to people are models from different governments and different countries and different institutions, showing the radioactive fallout covering the planet after about 20 days.
Mm-hmm.
But the radioactive fallout never stopped coming out. So it kept adding. And then when you put in the fuel pools that are splitting the atoms all day, every day, or adding into this, uh, it's a perfect storm, right, for this. Okay, so when you create all this, all this fallout starts killing all the phytoplankton at the surface of the ocean. Phytoplankton lives at the top of the ocean. And phytoplankton is the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain. It's the biggest producer of oxygen on the planet is the Pacific Ocean, is the biggest ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And it got the biggest hit, right? The airborne covered the ocean, and NOAA from the United States acknowledged that radiation was from the ocean floor to the top of the ocean, but it was also the airborne plumes shows the upper troposphere all the way to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put it all together, of course, when you got rid of the biggest carbon sequester, the biggest part of the food chain, you, you start to see the food chain breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
But it happened so quick, I think it caught the whole planet off guard. And this is why we see this panic type reaction, this desperation in the nuclear industry to try to salvage itself. And so, for people to really appreciate that, I want to remind them that in 2020, the International Energy Agency estimated between 2020 and 2026, which was a 6 year period, which is just 3 years away, that renewable energies would new energy coming to the grid in that 6 year period would equal all gas, oil, coal, and nuclear combined, and that's 4,800 gigawatts. So last year, for instance, or 2021 was 291 gigawatts of new energy came online. 291 gigawatts rather. This was all renewables. 0.4 gigawatts was nuclear. So the ratio was just stunning how it was equal to 333 large nuclear power plants coming online at the same time.
How many?
333 in 2021.
Whoa.
And in
Yeah.
2020, it was equal to 300 nuclear plants where the renewables came online. So in a 2-year period, it was equal to over 600 nuclear power plants came online in a 24-month period of renewables. So there's no way nuclear can compete with something like that.
Mhm.
And so they were trying to, they were already ostracized. The whole world was turned against them since Fukushima. They've come out with all kinds of propaganda to try to. A lot of the people went back to sleep and pretended, it didn't matter
Mm.
anymore.
And
Became
it, again, I'm interrupting you. I feel
that's
ashamed.
great. No, go ahead.
No, I was wondering, like, maybe you talk about the 2011 Fukushima, but what I notice is that, which is so why I also am so glad you're here as a guest. Like,
Thank
can
you.
you maybe explain, and maybe I can ask you to talk a bit slower for the people
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. No, that's
It's
not a
your
bad idea.
enthusiasm. It's your enthusiasm. But to
Great.
explain what happened in Fukushima, what in your opinion has really been what has happened,
Okay.
if that's the right timing, because
No, it's perfect. No, no, it doesn't hurt. That's the very foundation of that what I'm talking about. So
mm,
again, you had so there's a lot going on there, and I'm just going to run right through everything. I'll slow down my voice speech about a little
thanks.
bit, hopefully, but I'm going to run through that. That's a complicated story, but I can make it easy for
Mm,
everybody. So there was a tsunami, multiple tsunamis. You had an earthquake along a 400-kilometer fault line that dropped about over 6 feet, say. And that created a tsunami that hit the coastline for around 480 miles, around 600 kilometers. It hit the coastline at around 500 miles per hour. And so there was wave after wave came in on top of each other, and it ingressed itself about 10 kilometers inland at very high rapid speeds, obviously. So this washed out about 2,000 square miles of Japan's coastline, which was the patch in the Pacific Ocean was around 2,000 square miles of houses and buildings and everything else
mm,
got washed out to the ocean. So this was actually 680 kilometers of the coastline got washed away. There was 15 reactors in that zone, but there was also a lot of nuclear waste stored in that zone that we won't get into. So at Fukushima in particular, they admit to, and that we have the documentation to back up our assertions, was 4 reactors had blew up. They exploded. And each reactor, I'll explain to you. Reactor 1 was 190 feet tall, 150 feet wide reactor building, 19 stories tall. And this had 40 years of reactor cores stored at the top of it in 2 fuel pools and a running reactor. This melted down and blew up. Reactor 2 done the same thing. Reactor 3 done has the same attributes, done the same thing. And Reactor 4 was shut down for maintenance. But the maintenance remains they're removing fuel. And when they're removing fuel, they only remove at best half of it. So the other half blew up. And we know this from the documentation we got. Uh, there was 736 pictures released from drones in 2020. Those pictures, when you zoomed in on the reactors, were all redacted. So this was really interesting. Why would we release, and this was the only time I ever seen that, by the way, why did they release on the 10th anniversary 736 pictures from a very high quality camera from a drone,
mhm,
and that all the reactors were redacted? And I was trying to wrap my mind around this. Nobody was talking about it. I got this from a Chinese site that was linked to TEPCO, which was the Japanese company. Okay, so I zoomed in on it and I started realizing that all the reactors were redacted from this was the original footage. And so behind reactor 4 was the common spent fuel pool. All of the common spent fuel pool was redacted. But on the back of it was a bank, a wall of dirt. And so a whole bunch of transport trucks had washed up and stacked up behind that. And it gave you some context to how big the facility actually was. When I zoomed over to reactor 5 and 6, reactor 6 was redacted. The stack alongside of the so-called smokestack, which is the vent stack for the fuel pool, was redacted, and the pump house was redacted. And what I mean by that was pixelated; you couldn't see anything. So the reactor buildings themselves, 1, 2, 3, and 4, were redacted. The common spent fuel pool was redacted, and reactor building 6 was redacted. So this we can't prove 100% whether they had a meltdown at reactor 6 or the common spent fuel pool. But I can confirm through thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures that we got, emails and documentaries on top of this documentation. There was 4 million emails released after. A lot of that was redacted. And in the early days, used to cover it a lot. But so reactor 1 and 2 fuel pools is gone. Reactor 2 and 2 fuel pools is gone. Reactor 3 and 2 fuel pools, each of these with decades of reactor cores in each fuel pool, are gone. Reactor 4 and the fuel pools were gone. And that's not, there's no way to misinterpret this. This is 100% lost. So on a small scale, this is, say, 30 Chernobyls. But in reality, it's absurdly more than that. Now, a meltdown is even worse because it's burning at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So it's cannibalizing steel and rebars and rocks and water. And what I mean by that is it's burning at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So it consumes it like firewood, but it atomizes it and aerosols it, ionizes it, and radiates it, and releases it as a radioactive plume. So if I stay there with a hose and spray it at a nuclear meltdown, its release, it's like a nuclear bomb is blown up 1 million, 10 millionth of a second or something. A nuclear meltdown is consuming everything and radiating it and releasing it as an invisible plume all the time. So it's very insidious. It's very dangerous for all species, and it's the worst case scenario. This is what was happening. It's still ongoing, and we know this because of we cover this nonstop every week, week after week, year after year. Since this has happened, we've been on this. The cover up is just shocking. They're pretending they got the fuel out of reactor 3 and reactor 4, and we have a whole bunch of media pretending that they're in fuel pools in buildings that don't exist. So it's very difficult to have a conversation. And normally I'll provide all the documentation when I'm doing my presentations.
Exactly, and everyone, that's also on your website, and you
you're
have
linked to it.
still, yeah, you have all your live stream still on YouTube, but you're recently on Rumble. But for everyone who wants to look for previous YouTube videos, yeah, it's so amazing.
Nuclear for Dummies, yeah.
Yeah, that you do that you just 5 days a week approximately you talk, and I myself find it so amazing that you do that. But for me, by the repetition, and then it starts. That did something to me.
It makes sense.
It started because I felt already that something was wrong from Fukushima, but yeah. So thanks for putting all your effort.
And what Monique is talking about is that I provide the pictures, the headlines, the documentation as I'm talking when I'm doing these presentations. So it's not just me. I don't have an opinion. There's no conjectures. We're only talking facts, and we're not going to talk about whatever facts it is we got available. So we're not going to try to postulate or extrapolate anything. We're just going to talk about facts and show that documentation each time.
Exactly. That's so great about
it. And reinforce it day after day, week after week.
Yeah.
And I was always hoping that it'd be hundreds of people would pick up on this and do the same thing, and I could retire, right, and have a normal life like everybody else.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. And so I said I'll keep going. Now I accepted it. That first off, it's a very difficult subject, and that's why I provide the documentation so anybody can learn it. And what we're doing here tonight is fantastic in one sense because I don't have to work like a dog all day to get a show ready. I can just sit here and say everything. And
Yeah.
I used to say sometimes I should do a radio show of my own so I don't have to provide all the documents all the time. But I
Yeah.
can't educate you if I did that. Right? I can't educate the population if I do something like that, and it wouldn't be fair. Until the population is talking about the subject, I don't have a right to take a day off theoretically. But I did. I been very sick. This has been a rough last 12 months, pretty rough,
Yeah, exactly.
and I'm getting healthy again now. And I've been I had a bunch of heart attacks 3 months ago. Spent 20 days in the intensive care unit, and then I have 7 stents put in.
Yeah.
And so this is 2 months ago since I got out of the hospital. And as soon as I got out of the hospital, I went back to work, and I should have took a couple of weeks off, but I've been doing it for so long, it's not so bad, right? Because you just
Yeah.
talk, and I was pretty laid back. Now I'm going to start doing the research again. Last year was really bad because I also had a kidney stone.
So,
Then
yeah,
I
you
found
had.
out I had cancer on
Oh
my
man. Yeah,
kidney,
and some trouble with your equipment as
and then
well.
I had some serious issues with
Oh,
my equipment.
yeah.
A lot of breakdowns. Currently, I can't do any marine research. I'm still trying to get my outboard motor back. Now, my outboard motor's been to Alaska 6 times, right? So it's got a lot of hours on it.
Yeah.
But that platform is a very important platform to the research, and we're on the Atlantic Ocean. And what we discovered out here, the first expedition I done on the Atlantic Ocean, I had found 5 dead birds the first trip out there. The first bird that I found had a tumor on half of its head,
Ooh,
and
ooh.
so that was we streamed that live as I was doing it, by the way, and that kind of set the pace for what I was looking at. And so all of a sudden, I started paying attention. And instead of having this incredible biodiversity of birds on the coastline, the most we could find was around 5 species total, which is not. It should be around 380 species or
Oh
something down there.
man, yeah, it hurts my heart because I saw the pictures of you of all these
It was
expeditions and then the coastlines and horrific starvation of animals. For me, by the way, if it's the right moment, that I was also suddenly I could connect a lot thanks to your live shows, but and my feeling that, for example, now I forgot what I wanted to ask, but that the animals look up more the people because they are emaciated, and suddenly there was something like, man, now I understand
That's
why.
the catalyst, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the catalyst was we broke the food chain, and then that trickle effect took a few years to start manifesting. And we were
Yeah.
looking for it. We were expecting it, and when it showed up, we were on top of it, and we recorded it. So my first YouTube channel they took down when I was out looking for spiders 2 years ago, and I discovered the spiders were missing. I was looking for other species, obviously, but I was talking. There was a researcher coming through with a bunch of people on quads and side by sides, off road vehicles, and they stopped into my campsite, and they were researchers from a different province. He was telling me there was no spiders in his province, and so I put that out that night in a video and said, "Hey, guess what? I was just talking to a researcher from Nova Scotia, and he's telling me the same thing." And then the next day, I went to put out another video to update everybody because we're looking for bees, we're looking for wasps, we're looking for migratory birds, we're looking for any species whatsoever,
Yeah.
and I wasn't finding them. And so the next morning, I went to put out another update, and my site was gone. I had no strikes on my site YouTube channel. I had no emails, no nothing. They took my site down. And so
Yeah.
the current site that I'm using on YouTube is a new site that I started 2 years ago. I've been censored extremely heavy on that site. Whereas my other site, I had 24,200 subscribers for 4 years straight. Never gained one, never lost one.
Yeah, I
And
see it
then when I
too.
was yeah, and
Yeah.
then when I was looking for spiders, they took my site down because I was that was really stuff. And they were finding all the ants nests, but the ants nests were all empty, and we weren't finding any trout or salmon in the river. We're talking to fisheries and oceans when they were checking on the rivers and asking them, and they were reporting. um, these big dragonflies were missing, and a whole bunch of different species. Capelin and the squid were rolling on the beaches together, and squid don't roll on the beach, and that they were all undersized, what they call described as skinny. And so I was
Yeah.
reporting on all this for the previous couple of days, and then all of a sudden they took my site down because we were now on the Atlantic Ocean. We were on the opposite ocean doing the research, and that was connecting too many dots, I would imagine, right? And so I had to get off my research expedition at that point and head back home because we didn't have the support network to stay out there and start up a new YouTube channel. And they'd done the same thing the following year, but last year I started off the year with a kidney stone, all kinds of breakdowns, then all the way up until now. Now I'm finally starting to recover. So this is spring. I'll be out researching another month or so. I guess I'll be headed back out on the research expeditions, and it's pretty dismal at this stage, right? But we need that to quantify whether or not there's a change. Did the species recover? Is it worse? Is it the same? That has,
Yeah.
at all costs, that is the most important thing, is
And
getting
what
that
what do
research.
what do you expect in that way? Do you expect the species more to have withdrawn, or do you
I
have a
expect that to be a lot worse, yeah.
yeah?
And so one of the weird things about this was finding spiders on everybody's houses. Not a lot of different species either, but what was really interesting about that is they're very vulnerable, and that's not their normal habitat, right? So they got bushes and trees and everything else. The spiders can't tie onto that. So I was trying to wrap my mind around what was the hell was going on here, and obviously what's going on was that plants and trees will bring radiation up through the roots, for instance, and they'll bring it to the tips of the plants. So there's a lot of people like eating pine needle tea or drinking pine needle tea,
Yeah.
but Japan banned pine needle tea, for instance, because the radiation sucks right up to the tips of the pine needles, and so you're getting huge doses. Now, another problem was that the spiders, there should have been insect-eating birds picking the spiders off the side of the building, and they're tying on the spider webs are all deformed. There's nothing in the spider webs. Now, normally I check the spider webs to see what species are in an area because that's the best spot to check, right? You'll find all these little different insects in the spider webs. And so typically that's what I would check would be the spider webs, but there ain't no spider webs. And the ones I found two out in the woods, and we're talking 400 miles in the forest, traveling and camping out day after day after day. And so you're moving camp every 2 or 3 or 4 days, and you're doing 10 kilometers one way, 10 kilometers the next day. You move the whole operation about 30 kilometers the day after, a couple of days later, and then do the setup shop. And you're doing a very gruesome or grueling type research where you're trying to get all the ponds and little lakes and streams and rivers. And I have underwater submergibles for stuff like that. And I'm finding nothing. There's no fish jumping in any of the ponds, and we're talking around 300 plus ponds. There's no fish jumping in the ponds. And I have drones
Really?
that I'm going to send out to see what's in it if I can find it. There's no birds in the ponds, and there's no birds visiting my campsite.
Oh.
So I was leaving food out at my campsite the whole time, which is not recommended, by the way. But all of a sudden, it doesn't matter because nothing visiting to check the food. And I'll be doing that again this year. And so there was a study on 56 little insect-eating birds nest, 56 nest, and they were raising their fledglings, which takes about 21 days. And so over that 21 days, there was a bunch of universities counted the insects that were brought to the fledglings to eat. They ate over 5 million insects in 21 days.
Boo.
So they're very voracious appetites, right? I think it was around 700 per fledgling insects per day was brought to them, and this was considered an accurate study. So in the forest, I had no insects bother me in my campsite in very early in the morning, very late at night. That's when you can hear the best sounds. There was zero sounds. It
Mm-hmm.
was silent. It was silent, right? There was no. But the first year you could hear the birds in the forest. The second year, a few times you would hear the birds in the forest. Last year you didn't hear them at all. So
So.
that really told the story, right? You weren't hearing any birds in the forest. If you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't see them, you would still hear them the first year. But
Mm-hmm.
by the third year, weren't here. So that was now it's this is year 12 after it. I'm talking over the last 3 years, right? In particular,
Mm-hmm.
on the east coast, on the Atlantic Ocean, on the west coast, when I was doing the research expeditions, there was no birds visiting. There was no birds hanging out with me in the anchorages anywhere along the coastline. And the last expedition on the coastline was 2019 for Vancouver to Alaska. I counted 3,000 birds over the 4 months. Most of them were in two places at the same time, around 1,500 birds in each place. They were mostly seagulls, and that was two different places. But as for actual, the seabirds, migratory birds, and stuff like that, I didn't come across them. Now, in 2015, there was a over a million Cassini auklets, which are microscopic feeders, and there was 1.4 million common murres showed up on the coastline from Alaska to British Columbia, Canada, and they were all emaciated.
Mm-hmm.
And now the common murres can dive 900 or 600 feet all day long. Not can, but do. They dive 600 feet all day long. They feed on anchovies and squids and sardines
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So normally they would go to a coastline and they can eat mussels and sea life in the tidal zones if they can't get their typical migratory food.
Mm-hmm.
But they were showing up emaciated. In fact, they were showing up like here on the East Coast last year in the inland waters where they don't belong, in freshwater where they actually don't belong. And so another thing people should know is that shellfish bioaccumulate radiation 120,000 times more than fish do. And fish
Mm-hmm.
are voracious bioaccumulators. But shellfish are filter feeders. And so they're the worst ones to eat.
And
And so,
does that count for seaweed as well? Or
yeah, seaweed's really bad.
yeah,
We got studies of 40 million becquerels out of a small bed of kelp from California, for
kelp.
instance. So
Yeah.
that tells you that it does.
Mm.
Now, again, right? We had 700 algae on the west coast. When I done the research expeditions, I was only finding three species. Was the green kelp, what they call kelp cabbage. There's the common kelp. These are like the brown kelp with the little bulbs into it, and
Mm.
a little tiny. And all of these were very bad shape and bull kelp. So out of the 700 algae that should have been there, we only found three of it, and they were the typical prolific, most prolific types of kelp, but none of them were healthy in none of the places. And um, and so we're not just seeing it in the ocean; we're seeing it in the insect world, and it's very noticeable. It's unassailable what's really going on,
Mm.
uncontestable that the radiation is the mitigating is the factor behind all this. Is the catalyst for the die-off. So as you break down the food chain, you'll start to see the tumble effect, which is what we're seeing, the die-offs, the emaciation of all the species. So when they talk about gray whales, for instance, there was one story there was 70 gray whales, they were emaciated. And
Mm.
so they would travel 10,000 kilometers. So they have to go a long way before they end. To go from 12 inches of blubber down to 3 inches of blubber takes months.
Mm.
So if they can't find food in that month, that's a slap in the face to what's really going on.
Yeah.
So
And you have also videos of that, so there is all proof also.
yeah, we document it every
Yeah,
month.
exactly, and that's so great. That's why, yeah, again, people look at his website and videos on YouTube, etc. But because the proof is there, and yeah, it's awful
Yeah,
to see.
so it wasn't just the gray whales. We were seeing the same things with humpback whales. These were more unusual mortality events declared. There
Mm.
was the same thing for killer whales. And now another problem with I'm only going to postulate on this one here, with the whales. And it's not an entire speculation, right? But I got the evidence to back it up. But one of the things that struck me was that you had all types of different whales getting an unusual mortality event. The same thing for seals and sea lions, mammals, right? Air breathers. And one of the things we know about was the predictions were that the whales were going to have 1,000 becquerels a kilogram. This was early predictions, 2012, 2012, 2013 predictions, and we still had that documentation. Was you can expect the whales to bioaccumulate in the worst case scenario 1,000 plus becquerels per kilogram. Well, that's your body now is under siege from so much white blood cells. That's called leukemia.
Mm.
So eating food from Japan can give you leukemia. That's the problem with Japan growing food in a nuclear wasteland.
Mm.
And they take it to a whole different level. They're actually growing alongside of 1 ton bags of radiation, millions and millions.
Mm.
They picked up around 30 million 1 ton bags of radiation, 3% of just the Fukushima prefecture. But the food was banned from 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima prefecture.
Mm.
So they should have picked up 30 billion bags or something like that. And that still would have been just a fraction. This was just farms and the communities they were trying to manipulate complacent people to move back to, which they did, right? But it's very few. They currently, a few weeks ago, they opened up 3% of Okuma. This is 2 kilometers from the ongoing nuclear meltdown. They're
Oh.
building a school there, and they
Mm.
got currently 26 school children that take a bus to Okuma, which is 2 miles, 2 kilometers away from the ongoing nuclear meltdowns, and then they get trucked back home at the end of the day. So they don't actually live there, but they're going to school there to pretend that is safe on a statistic
Yeah.
paper, right, for a study.
Mm.
So it's a very cruel industry, right? When you look at
Incredible.
it, 80,000 children in Fukushima prefecture were given dosimeters for the academics to study the children, but the children, these are not like Geiger counters where you can read it yourself and say, holy, there's a lot of radiation here. You can only read it at the university when they finally get it. So they're using the children as human guinea pigs, which is, if you look at what they've done for Hiroshima, if people are not familiar, Hiroshima and Nagasaki is where America dropped nuclear bombs on Japan in 1946. And instead of people moving somewhere else, they rebuilt their communities back on the nuclear bomb craters. And so they've been studying these same people for 70 years. And so this is cruel. That's a very cruel thing to do. And I cover that on its anniversary at least each year, amongst many other times. But on the anniversary, I'll do a whole presentation on, and I have a absurd amount of academic studies about the radiation found in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's not habitable at all.
Mm.
And yet they rebuilt the cities. We've never done it anywhere else on the planet where we built the cities back on the bomb craters themselves or in bomb craters.
Mm.
So, but
Yeah.
what does show you how cruel it is, yes?
Yeah, and
Right?
then also that you're talking about Hiroshima, and I know there are stories around the world, or I met stories about that. For example, the Hiroshima, that was not accurate. That these were like fire bombs or whatever. But in my
Oh,
opinion,
sure, yeah,
yeah, you
yeah.
know about that. It's all try to get confusion and doubt, I
Yeah.
believe.
And that's the game. They've been doing this for
Yeah,
80 years.
yeah.
So, one of the things people don't appreciate about Hiroshima and Nagasaki was that people and horses, there was a lot of horses back then, people and horses and animals and children that were thrown 600 feet in the air.
Mm.
And they died from falling out. Well, they died from being ejected 600 feet up into the air and then falling back down. They were turned into projectiles. And there were studies out of Canada from the glaciers in Canada that were radioactive. People were atomized in aerosol and ionized and radiated, and that radiation showed up in the glaciers here in Canada from people that were. Now, America took around 4,000 dead Japanese back to Los Alamos National Laboratories and these other national laboratories and incinerated them and sniffed the ashes for radioactive isotopes. So it's a very cruel industry when you
Whoa,
think about
really?
it.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very cruel industry
Mm,
with its whole legacy is just insidious. Really,
mm,
there's um, there's a lot of them. They study radiation by taking beagle dogs and beagle puppies because they got the best sniffers apparently, and so they let them sniff radiation
mm,
and they study them. And now typical animals will get from plutonium. You'll get three different tumors
mm,
in your lung, your liver, and your bone, or your lung, your kidney, and your bone, and you'll get them at the same time. But most of the people will die from the tumors in their bones, but not always, right? But you'll get
mm,
those three tumors by the time you're dying from plutonium exposure.
mm,
And so another one of the rules is they say, well, long-lived radioactive isotopes don't have a lot of energy, but they're only talking about natural stuff that everybody's already acclimated to through genetic superior selection. When it goes through a chain reaction, it's totally different. So another way to think about that is they had sent space rovers to Mars that operated on plutonium, and plutonium has a very very long half life. But the idea was plutonium would provide the energy for a very long time, right? The rover would break down through other reasons, but the plutonium still produced the energy. So because the lies is very frustrating that they tell about nuclear. They'll claim that it's like a banana, it's harmless, like walking in sunshine
mm,
or climbing a mountains or sleeping next to somebody. Then the answer to that is, you know, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags in Japan because it's not like a banana or not like a potato chip or not like walking in sunshine. And we have terrorist laws because it's not like bananas, not like potato chips. But that's what they've been feeding the public
mm.
through all the
Yeah.
venues, schools, universities, the mass media, Hollywood. Uh, Again, one of the big things that impress on people is you're gonna have to get rid of nuclear. Is not going to go voluntarily. It's got 80 years of this industry behind it, and it has no illusion about what's up. It knows what it's doing. And I think that's just, they call it population control, but it's so indiscriminate, right? It's collective punishment where it takes out all the other species too. So that doesn't really work, right? When you try to, some people will say, oh, that's population control, right? But, and I get that there is a large percentage of influential people on the planet carrying that out. But this is collective. So this is attacking all species. We're destroying the foundation of all species.
Mm,
And as you know, we're destroying the species at an alarming, untenable rate, right? This is untenable what we're
mm,
doing. And so when I went out and done the coastline, we went from having this beautiful, incredible diversity to zero, to nothing. In fact, if you're shipwrecked on the coastline right now, you'll starve to death. There's nothing there to eat. There's nothing in the forest to catch. If you eat the food, the plants there, you're going to get leukemia from radioactive poisoning. So we're a very slippery slope, and we can't change what already happened, but we can try to protect the species that are left, and we can try to protect our own loved ones and friends and families and population by getting educated. And first, the big thing to learn is they're shipping food at a nuclear wasteland. You got to avoid that at all
mm,
costs. And
mm.
they're shipping it to other countries, relabeling it, and they got caught at that on a number of occasions. So
Yeah,
the big
when you talk about that, yeah, I'm so worried because, well, we like here eating in the house, like it's really healthy, like kelp or seaweed. How do you call that? Forgot now the name, but it's really normally it should be healthy Japanese food. So it really the whole Japan has been contaminated. Is
right, yeah.
ooh,
Now, when you're
or
talking about kelp, the problem with kelp, I'll just cut you off 1 second. The problem with
yeah.
kelp was that the radioactive fallout hits the coastline,
Mm-hmm.
and it hits your mountain ranges. And so it loses, the clouds will lose a big, large part of their payload when you hit the mountains. Well, they'll start losing some of their payloads as you hit the coastline through evaporation and convection. So when they hit the mountains, you lose a large part of their payload of radioactive fallout. That will wash down to your coastline eventually, a large percentage of it that don't get hung up in your forests or lakes or rivers or estuaries. A lot of this stuff is liberated back up through in the morning through the morning dew. And then when the sun hits it, evaporates, gets up and starts drifting around again looking for some prey. Now, when it washes down to your coastline, what's on your coastline? That's where your kelp is to, right? That's the problem with kelp was you get all this extra radiation. That's where it's going to gather up is on your shorelines. So the solution is you're going to have to say now the Netherlands, the Dutch, I guess is it?
Yeah, Dutch Netherlands.
Dutch Netherlands. I call it Netherlands. Did I?
Yeah,
My apologies.
Netherlands. Well, it's
That's
Nederland.
terrible. Oh my God.
No, no,
Netherlands.
it sounds cute.
Yeah, the Netherlands. Oh my goodness. So the Netherlands, last night it was announced that they're going to put two large reactors and looking at small modular reactors, and that they located officially around a half $1 billion, a half 500 million USD, which is not enough to build a reactor, by the way, but it's enough to cause a lot of trouble. You already have one reactor in the Netherlands, so now I got to learn. Now I'm probably going to say that properly. That's too bad. People can't make fun of me anymore. And the reactor you have in the Netherlands is surrounded by farms, and that the river that's feeding it is feeding farms downstream too. See, so this is real bad news. Of course, you got fuel pools at that reactor. People say, well, it's not that big of a reactor. Well, there was a study just came out of Canada where 150 miles away from a nuclear power plant, they had a cave, not a cave, but a mine shaft. There's a mile and a quarter underground. And they put clear water down there. And the anti-neutrinos from the nuclear power plant 150 miles away were hitting the water. And it shows up as a flash. And so they were able to demonstrate that a nuclear power plant can be detected 150 miles away, a mile and a quarter under rock. So, which meant that if you're living within the 50-mile range of it, first off, no matter what, if you're living within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant, you're getting brutal radioactive fallout after the second year because they're going to bring fuel and put it in a pool. Now it's splitting atoms into the environment. You can't contain it. And you can't contain it because it's very vulnerable atoms we're talking about. And so they'll displace the oxygen. And then if you introduce air back in there at that stage or spark, you'll detonate it. And so everything is vented. And which means this is why most of them are surrounded by farms, by the way, to keep bioaccumulating locally, but also most likely to poison you in your supermarkets because almost all nuclear power plants worldwide are stuck in a very active farm lands. And so that wasn't an accident. I don't know if we kind of talked about it before we went live, but just to be clear about that, is all farms are surrounded. Almost every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms, and that's on purpose to poison you at your supermarket. So you have to, you have to rethink everything. The low doses of radiation. We got tons of studies showing that the low doses of radiation, low dose compared to lethal doses, is something we're being exposed to more and more and more because of the bioaccumulation. All the reactors we got on the planet are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. But then you have big pulses like Chernobyl, like the Mayak in Russia. That still goes worldwide. And they have multiple accidents up there at the fuel fabrication facilities. Then there was Sellafield in the United Kingdom. There's still 8 million liters a day going into the Atlantic Ocean from a Nix oxide fuel reactor that melted down there. There's Three Mile Island is an enigma because Santa Susana was 460 times worse than Three Mile Island, but the world media only reports on Three Mile Island, doesn't report on the Santa Susana nuclear meltdown in 1959.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 460 times more releases than Three Mile Island. The studies on Three Mile Island said 2 million people, this was the cover story, 2 million people got the same dose as a millisievert, which is 1,000 microsieverts. But that's not how you measure radioactive fallout. You measure it in physical atoms, you measure it in becquerels. And one of the studies said it was equal to watching color television for an extra year. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, that just got nothing to do with each other. This was absolute frightening that they felt they could say something like that, and they did, and there was nobody to call them on it. No academic of any discipline had raised dissenting voices about it. I thought that was really telling, way back in the 70s that was able to happen. So Three Mile Island, of course, is still melting down, and now you have, when you look at the big picture, then all the dumping they've done into the oceans for 3 decades. Britain had special ships that would go out and drive in the Atlantic Ocean and in the shallow water, what's known as the nursery of the continental shelf is shallow water.
Mm-hmm.
That's your nursery. So they had big special container ships or cargo ships going out dumping 45-gallon drums off the ship uh, on the continental shelf. Now, it didn't like just stop and dump it all in one spot. It was just kept driving and throwing it over everywhere. And what happens was, now they're not the only ones that done it, but they were really bad for 3 decades. Was the 45-gallon drums implode right away because you're talking about around 14, almost 15 pounds per square inch every 33 feet. So when it sinks down a couple of 100 feet, the 45-gallon drum crumbles. It's immediately releasing that radioactive material. They've done that for 3 decades. The Americans done similar things. Many different countries had actually done similar things. So Russia has around 18,000 dumps in the Arctic on top of that. So then you have, they used to have burn pits at a lot of these national laboratory sites where they would burn radiation. They have incinerators at all nuclear power plants, by the way. When they're legally allowed to burn certain amounts of radiation contaminated material, but you can't destroy the radiation. All you can do is liberate the isotopes into the environment. Then all nuclear power plants have big pipes that go about a mile offshore where they're legally allowed to dump radioactive water, but there's no one there to check what kind of radiation is in that emission. And if they don't do it, then they got to store it for millions of years, and they don't have a repository. So for the last 80 years, they've been dumping and releasing everything. One of the worst scenarios, worst case stories I heard, and we got the evidence of, obviously, from their own admittance, was Hanford in the United States. Uh, Hanford uh, is 585 square miles, and in one spot alone, they had dumped 450 billion gallons in the 50s and early 60s directly into the soil. And that's equal to a 6 foot wide aquarium. Imagine having an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet. That's 450 billion gallons. This is very high level waste. The water that they're allegedly, the tanks in Japan were actually built to manipulate the population into believing it didn't contaminate the Pacific. The water that they claimed they were putting into it was 2.2 sieverts per liter. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose to a human. You'll die within the next couple of weeks from a short exposure. Your organs start to melt right away, and say you go home, then you die within the next couple of weeks. So if you take 2.2 sieverts a liter, first off, and puts it into a single tank, and we're only talking about beta that they're acknowledging, that's 1.4 million sieverts per tank. It means you can't build another tank anywhere on site because it's a lethal dose. If you're putting it and actually trying to filter it, if you could filter it, then the filter is so radioactive after about an hour you can't get back in the building. And then so they had 3 systems in Japan. There was the series system was supposed to filter cesium-137. That didn't work. And the reason is because you get so much radiation gathered up in a few hours, you can no longer get near it forever. There was the Riva system, which is France's water filtration system. It was exactly like Japan's alleged ALP system. All of these systems, and I cover this pretty regularly, and I have presentations just on the tanks in a playlist at Nuclear for Dummies on YouTube, where I give you the actual information and the pictures and the documentation each time. The the these systems in 2014 weren't had never worked at 2014. The reactors melted down in 2011. Originally, the reactors need 4,500 gallons a minute, every minute, 1,440 minutes a day of water to keep cool
Mm-hmm.
and to make electricity. So they're getting 120,000 tons a day coming out of this that they're putting in the tanks. Well, they got four reactor buildings that blew up, detonated, melted down, lost their fuel pools. It's the equivalent of taking a garden hose from a house and splitting it four ways. That's what they're talking about. They're putting in the tanks each day.
Whoa.
So
Yeah.
they're claiming if you turn your sink on really low and let it run for 24 hours, that's what they're claiming. They're they're spraying on each melted reactor at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So that doesn't add up, obviously, right? Originally the reactor needs 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. And so a garden hose can produce about 140 tons a day at 30 psi if you turn it all the way open. Do you want to let anybody independently test the tanks? Of course, the tanks, and if you try to filter this kind of radiation, what happens is, say if you filter 2.2 sieverts per liter of just beta, pretending gammas, alphas, and neutrons don't exist anymore, if you try to filter that after, say, 1 hour, if you start putting only clean water through the filter, the original water going through the filter was 2.2 sieverts per liter. If you put clean water through the filter, it's going to come out of there at dozens of sieverts per liter out the other end because the filter is so radioactive, it's going to create the radioactive water. Because this radiation has this weird ability to radiate things in that particular environment, right from the neutron bombardments and the gamma shines, the beta shines, the X-rays, and everything else. So it can't be filtered. So when they're telling you that there's only tritium, by the way, this is ludicrous to anybody with an education about this topic. And so it's really, really weird that we don't see any kind of descending voices, trying to be lucid about this narrative.
Mm.
It's completely, as you know, right, Monique,
It's
it's discouraged, right? You're
exactly, and how much I enjoy your talk, Dana. I myself, I unfortunately have to stop around to 10:30 because there is someone else living here in the house, and I'm in the living room recording and live streaming.
yeah, no,
S-
absolutely, yeah.
but yeah, I'm so intrigued. So that is also why I did not interrupt you too often. But
No, that's
it
okay.
is. I have myself still so many questions what I wanted to ask you, but maybe
Well,
also in the
we can do
chat.
another show another time.
Would you like
Uh,
to? That's what was
yeah,
my. Would
absolutely.
you like to come back? Because I would love to.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no, no.
Yeah.
And what I was trying to do for everybody tonight, because I know, look, I don't have to reach 1 million people. I just got to reach two or three people that make the decisions, right? And then
Exactly.
those who are joining the conversation, listening to it, and able to extrapolate things on. If they listen to it a few times, they end up getting this incredible education. They're able to extrapolate properly,
Mm.
diagnose things properly, on their own. So I try to give people a big diversity of so many different facets, a little bit jumbled, but there's so much going on, that even if you do not know nothing about this topic, if you listen to this a few times, you'll get a good hang of it because
Exactly. That's the
you got all
power.
the
I
foundation.
truly
Yeah.
feel that it did with me, and I was always very somehow also, yeah, also because of my MK Ultra past, I was always intrigued by, not intrigued, that's the wrong word, but felt like the nuclear energy is a danger to humanity. And I
Yeah.
have seen myself in person experiments, so that's what I can
That's
reveal a
100%
bit.
MK Ultra. Yeah, no, MK Ultra
Yeah,
100% real for people not aware.
it is real,
And
yeah.
so, oh, it's terrible real. It's
Mm,
frightening. This was going on for thousands of years,
mm,
and they took those techniques into the technological age, right? And weaponized it against entire populations. And we won't go. Obviously, we don't have time, but maybe next time we might even go into that. I
yeah.
actually studied that a lot of years ago. When I came across it, I was a little bit confused by. And so when I looked at it too, I realized, holy smokes, we got this is how they. It's basically mass hypnotization going on for
Mm.
Fukushima and the nuclear industry.
Exactly, and that is what, yeah, I talked about that with you before we went live. Like, I am flabbergasted by that. Even most people think that Chernobyl was even the worst event, and I always felt like Fukushima. That's I yeah.
Oh,
That's
you were right to think that way. Yeah. Did you
so.
have some questions, any comments there that you were
Well,
asking?
I will now go through the comments,
Do we
and
have time yet?
well, we have actually very very little time,
Yeah.
but I will.
Go ahead. So we got a
Yeah,
couple of.
I have to scroll now through the chat, so I apologize for that.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, you
Maybe
do your
we,
thing there.
maybe you
Just-
can take a sip of something to.
I'll keep them short too because I know we're. So you got like 10, 12 minutes left, is it? I think.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, I hate it, but because
No, that's fine.
but that's a good
We
sign,
were
eh?
we were a
Time.
little, yeah, we were a little late getting started, and so then we just went right at it, and
Exactly.
that time went pretty fast. Yeah.
But I did see some. Here I see a question from Sunbeam Sting. Uh, I hope it's a question to you, but I read it out loud. Also, you can now visit that station in Fukushima I saw on the news. Is that a risk still? Because a lot of people, they say on the news, have visited that site now.
Tokyo is 220 kilometers away. It's a risk to go to Tokyo.
Oh, yeah. Mm.
There's no way to go. It, just because you can visit something, don't mean it's safe. You can visit the two communities on both sides of it, but they're not safe.
Mm.
Well, you can't make them safe either. On top of that, and
Yeah.
that site is not nuclear scientists and academics and corporations, nuclear corporations. It's the homeless and the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language, and so you're going to see a lot of lies in the news,
Mm.
and try to match them up to what we talked about, and you'll see the incredible discrepancies for the people that are. Anything else you got there? I'm sorry, Monique. I know you only got a
Yeah.
few minutes left. Yep.
Yeah, well, Fokudo, oh, he asked for some documents or links. Well, I mentioned it in the chat, and I will, by the way, in a
I
few
provided in
minutes.
my videos. Yeah, my videos are nonstop documentation. It's
Exactly.
nonstop. Yeah.
And here Sunbeam Sting asks, is there a question time, or can we type them already, or is there one? Well, there was supposed to be a question time, but we started later because of internet
Yeah. Yeah.
interruption, and I have great internet here, so this was exceptional,
Yeah.
suspicious.
I was able to tell that actually when it happened to you. You were totally shocked that
Yeah.
it did because you do it every Saturday, right? You've been doing it
Every
for a year.
Saturday, yeah, and on a Tuesday evening I have my English live stream. So weekly, I do that now for more than a year, and there are live streams in which technical issues happen, but with internet connections, actually, it happened a couple of times. So this is very awkward. What happened? Um, so a question of Delvertje. Do you believe the tsunami near Japan that caused the Fukushima plant to melt was a natural tsunami?
Yeah, they're on the Ring of Fire. They have 1,000 earthquakes there each year. They have a 3,000 year history of tsunamis along their coastline. And you're talking about 400 kilometers of the fault line dropped. So I've heard speculation. I looked into it myself, certainly, that this was done by nuclear weapons, and that I also heard speculations that Israel had planted bombs during maintenance at one of the reactors. And so, if you look at the reactors and you look at a nuclear explosion, you can see the difference, right? Um, the building wouldn't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even with a small nuke, those buildings couldn't remain, and none of the evidence added up. I looked at all of these speculations, and because you don't know, and I couldn't
Yeah.
find any evidence that it was man-made.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if it was man-made or not. This has happened, and we're in real trouble.
Exactly. And isn't it, Nana? Yeah, I have so many questions, but now I see you as answering that question. But I was thinking, why did they überhaupt build that next near that fault line and on the coastline? That is very dangerous. Why did they specifically pick that spot, Fukushima? That's
That's a great question. Yeah,
yeah.
they well, the billet there is very dubious. They get 1,000 earthquakes a year along that coastline.
Mm,
They're located near major known fault lines. On top of that, they have the long legacy of tsunamis there, and the jet streams carry everything to the North America right away. But it goes worldwide after about 20 days. Certainly after 40, it's right back to Japan again.
mm,
But there's again, right? We've asked that question now for 12 years. Why the hell did you build? Why did you put the fuel pools at the top of the building? And why did you build them on a
yeah.
fault line?
That too, yeah. And then again, I have so many questions. I should stop it because maybe someone else still wants to ask something. Of Jos, why
It's
don't?
okay.
Yeah, but there
I
will
don't
be a
mind.
next time.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm
If
looking
you got a couple
forward
minutes,
to it.
keep going.
I look really looking
And
forward to it.
there's one street in Fukushima City, 70 kilometers away, where 7 people died on the one street in the first year, dropped dead.
Whoa, yeah, yeah,
Do anybody have a street in their town where 7 people dropped dead in one year?
yeah.
Like just crazy numbers.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. But there's too many crazy things happening, and because one of the questions was like diseases like ALS and
yeah,
Parkinson's. I see that increase
absolutely.
next to
Yeah,
the
that's
yeah
right.
diabetic, and it's
And
incredible.
Alzheimer's, there's a lot of mental health problems,
Mm.
and like real mental health,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
dementia and autism and
Is schiz?
Alzheimer's and
Yeah,
schizophrenia.
that's what I wanted
And
to
Down
ask.
syndrome is another one they study
Mm,
for nuclear accidents. They'll start looking for an increase of Down syndrome 9 months later.
mm, yeah,
After each nuclear accident, you see studies about that. That tells you more than you realize when you start
yeah,
thinking properly.
exactly. I will look
Well,
for more.
children are. You keep looking, and
Exactly, yeah.
I'll keep talking maybe. Cause you got 6 minutes left or something like that, by the sounds of it. And this has been covered up from day one. This we covered continuously, and at my site, the nuclearproctologist.org. And you scroll down a little tiny bit, you're going to see a video. It's a 17-minute video. You're probably going to need headphones or speakers. That's the story of Fukushima with all the evidence, by the way. It's meant for people that are trying to wrap their mind around this in a hurry. Because I generally don't do anything in a hurry. Pretty well tells me it takes me 2 hours to tell my name, average. I can't do nothing for less than 2 hours.
Mm. But
And I provide the
next time,
documentation. Right?
yeah. But sorry, next is there a delay? By the way, I don't think so. For when I or
There's nothing, no problems on my side. Everything looks
all
great.
right, because.
No.
There was one question from Jos Schover, and further on I did not see questions, but also people, the majority of people who are here, they know that I always have to quit at 10:30. So they are
Yeah,
so sweet, saying like, "We keep this question for next time," but I will
oh,
go
sure. Yeah.
to Jos'
Well,
his
you have time to
question.
digest it. Go ahead. Barry,
Uh,
did you have any questions? Barry, are you still there?
yeah, Barry, or yeah,
He's away from the mic, but it sounds of it.
yeah. He's also restreaming it. He told me
Oh,
on his
right. That's
channel.
right too.
So that's
Yeah.
an
Thank you.
extra.
That's excellent. That's awesome.
But
Um,
I did not check anything because I really wanted to focus on what you were talking about. So I didn't even check the chat really. So, but Jos, what did you ask me, Jos? Are you still there? Because I cannot see your question. Oh yeah, here. Maybe it's. I hope it's that question. Why don't people use thorium reactors? They are much safer. Dana Durnford, he asked. Why don't
yeah.
people use thorium? Tor- thorium? And
But
oh,
you can't make nuclear weapons out of the thorium reactors. The
oh,
thorium
thorium.
design's been around a long
Yeah,
time, but
thorium.
they haven't actually. Well, they have some what they call test models, right? But nothing producing power
Mm,
for that tickles everybody's fancies.
mm,
The industry wants the uranium plutonium because they can use that kind of energy for directed energy weapons because it's compact, and that's the big thing for obviously forever. There's going to be directed energy and laser type weapons, but also because of nuclear weapons, because there's so much money you can rob a country blind by justifying with nuclear weapons. They're insidiously expensive just to maintain, let alone to build them and test them and everything else. And so they love stuff like that, unfortunately. Yeah.
mm. And I see here another question from Jos earlier. Jos Grover, how are the fish in Canada now? I know at Halifax there are at least 3 oil plateaus in the sea, Dana, he says. Do you understand this question?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about sports fishery real quick. In the last couple of years, I go down and talk to sports fishermen in the spring and summer. And the last couple of years, they've been coming in empty. And they never see nothing like it. They can't find nothing. And then you'll see, like in the spring, though, you will see some. We got a 200-mile continental shelf, but we're seeing they're skinny. Everybody, all the old timers, the guys 80, 90 years old, are telling me I've never seen fish so skinny. Where they can normally get a codfish and they got two great fillets, now they need like six codfish to get the same kind of poundage, the same like the lengthwise. They're what they call skinny.
Mhm.
And again, go back to the whales where they're emaciated. One of the reasons is not just because of the lack of food. There might be food there, but they bioaccumulated so much radiation they can have leukemia. And we've seen this in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of sea lions where they died of weird cancers. And I visited a lot of these uh, communities with no automobiles, no roads there by ocean during my research expeditions. And the first thing I asked them is there are a lot of cancers, a lot of deaths in this community, unexplained sudden syndrome deaths, infant mortalities, and stuff like that. And the consensus was horrifying everywhere I went. It was humbling to say the least.
Mhm.
And you knew what the answer was eventually, but I still had to ask that question, and there was horror stories. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
Mm.
You can't switch it off, right? That kind of
No, I can imagine.
when they're telling you their loved ones, all the people that have died recently, and
Yeah.
where I'm too, there's a little community just a few miles away from me. Last year, in a 2 week period, there was 5 people under 50 dropped dead just outdoors walking around. We've never seen these are clusters, eh? Never seen nothing like it. Never heard telling nothing like that
Mm.
uh, pre Fukushima. And that is about it. I get is it? That's your clock right there, I think.
Yes, my clock, yeah. I don't want to stop.
That was awesome.
but,
Uh,
but maybe it's good, because I
yeah,
know
no,
the
it's good.
concentration level is approximately at the most 2 hours, so maybe it's good,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well, next time we'll do it next time. And so now that this is your first kick at the can, right? And
mm,
I'm sorry for the people that are watching that will be back later. So maybe they'll have a whole bunch of questions. And I don't shy away from questions. Questions are how you have a conversation. That's how you have a debate, right? And these
ex-
things are great.
Yeah, exactly. And next time, maybe start a bit sooner. Qua time, maybe.
Well,
But
you were
what's
trying. You done the best you could, and
yeah, exactly.
you can't beat the machine. So
Yeah. Well, stay in the Jitsi a bit. You don't have to go yet,
okay, yeah, sure,
Dana. I
okay,
love to
good.
talk a bit, but
Yeah,
it's about that I go offline so that yeah, the man here in the house is not bumping into a live stream. But I want to thank you really for being here, for your
and
enthusiastic
thank you
talk.
yourself. No, I appreciate it. I'm
Yeah,
happy. I'm anxious to tell people this information, get them started on the right path for their futures. Right? Yeah,
exactly. And I really wanted to give you that platform. And as
I
I said,
appreciate that. Oh,
I'm
yeah, you
really,
got 7 different platforms going at one time. That's fantastic. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
even more with if Barry is
And
restreaming.
Barry's restreaming. Yeah, on top of that,
Yeah.
it's
So
amazing.
and yeah. So
It's
I
very.
want.
It's one of the most important streams people will ever have, and I'm going to suggest everybody download it because you might not realize it right now, but in the near future you're going to be wanting to listen to this again.
Mm,
And this is full of information that'll do nothing but liberate
oh,
you.
so
Yeah,
much
many different
information.
ways.
Yeah, and I would ask also to support Dana by also subscribing to him and in all kinds of ways, what fits right, of course, and yeah, share, like, especially also sharing this video would be great, also for your to get a story out. Because for me it was eye-opening, and especially all the repetition of all your effort in going live every day, 5 days a week.
It's
It is
grueling,
amazing.
yes.
It is amazing
Yeah,
information, and I thank you
yes,
so
it is.
much, Dana.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you
And
again. Yeah.
next time, all the questions we will add and answer. And well, everyone, thank you so much. Also, Miranda, now I say it in the right way. Thanks so much for the technical help, and Barry as well, and for the moderators as well. So, everyone, see you next time. And coming Tuesday, I have my English live stream about my MK Ultra Past. And next Saturday, it's a Dutch live stream as usual. And well, Dana will get back as guest, and I will let you know. So, you have a few last words, Dana?
Yeah, the nuclearproctologist.org, THE in front of it.
Exactly. Okay, people, I hear the man come into the house. Alright, everyone. Bye bye. See you next time.